Terrorism, natural disaster, and financial uncertainty are just a few of the signs that make it seem like the world is coming apart at the seams. Author Jeanne Nigro says that despite it all, we can stand strong in uncertain times. Welcome back to the Harvest Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Valerie. It's
okay, so Jeanne, you were with us a couple months ago, but now you actually have your new project. It's out.
It's exciting.
It's called Unshaken.
I've been waiting forever.
I know, right? What's the subtitle for it?
It's Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times.
That's right, and we are living in uncertain times. All we have to do is just go online, read a headline, and there boom, you think the Lord is going to crack the sky any moment.
Exactly,
correct?
And we hope that He will.
That's right, but we have to live here on earth. So that has created a need for us to have intimacy with God, and that's what I guess that's what your book is about, intimacy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Valerie, it's about, how can we stand strong? Because with all of the news and everything that happens, every day it's something different. It's scary. And the enemy wants us to live in fear and frustration, or just hide out and wait till Jesus comes back and say, well, I'm not doing anything till He comes back. And that's not what God's calling us to do. But we have to have that intimate relationship with Him. And I believe He's giving us time now to practice, to grow in intimacy with Him. Because it's not going to cut it just to be a believer just for social reasons, or to feel good, or for our own needs to be met, or just to go to church or whatever. It's like we have to have that encounter with Jesus.
But it takes time. It takes getting away with God. And I'm saying that like that's a negative thing, but these are some of the reasons that people give. Like, you're talking right. I don't have time.
I work.
I don't see the benefits of it. A lot of people, I have a relative who would ask me from time to time, why does God answer your prayers and He doesn't answer my prayers? So, I mean, but we do have to take that time, don't we?
Well, you know what, that gets to the root, really, Valerie, what you're saying of what blocks intimacy with us is oftentimes it's lies that we believe about God.
Okay.
Whether we call it misperceptions of God or lies we believe about God. But we get these beliefs in our heart. Like He talks to you, you're more spiritual, so He talks to you, or He answers your prayers, but not mine. I work full time, so I don't have time to study the Bible like you do. Or we kind of come up with these lies that we believe about God. Oftentimes what they really are putting someone else's face on God. So if authority figures that we grew up with, be it our parents or coaches, or even just messages that we get from television or from our culture, tell us, have treated us a certain way, or gave us a certain message that maybe what we have, we're not important, or we're all alone, or we're on our own, or we have to hold things together, or we have to be strong, or there's all these messages that we get growing up or from our culture. We have to look a certain way to have worth. All these things, they impact how we see God, because we think that He sees us the same way. And that really blocks intimacy, because if you believe that He's waiting for you to figure it out, or He's sometimes there, He's sometimes not, or He's, you're alone, or He's expects you to be perfect. How do I, because sometimes we just think, I can't be perfect enough for God, so I can't have that intimacy that you're talking about. But yet that's the reason that you exist. That's your purpose. When I wake up in the morning, my default mode is to think about my to-do list, everything I have to get done, and I start getting stressed out, and God has to remind me in my quiet time, wait a minute, I only have to worry about one thing, not my whole to-do list, one thing. That one thing is that intimacy with Him.
Talk about sin and how that separates us and keeps us from that really intimate relationship. Sometimes we're looking and saying, my prayers are not being answered, but sometimes when we practice what God has said not to practice, it's a roadblock, isn't it?
It is, and I think that we, again, fall under this lie of, well, we think about the big sins, like, well, I'm not in adultery, or I'm not, lying, and we don't see the moment-by-moment things, and God convicts me moment by moment.
Your attitude,
your attitude
your
when
thoughts.
I'm driving and I'm stressed out.
Oh, you too?
Every time I'm stressed, when we're stressed, we have to ask ourselves, what lie am I believing about God? Because at that moment, we're either believing a lie about God or a lie about ourselves. When we fear, when we stress, when we have bitterness, when we're frustrated, we can watch the news, Valerie, and especially at the time of elections, and have anger, have frustration, and feel like, well, but we're justified in feeling that way because look at what they're doing to our country. Wait a minute. the enemy gets a handle in our lives. We've got to see the warfare behind it. The enemy gets a handle in our lives through the frustration, through the anger. He doesn't wait and say, oh, you're justified, I won't get involved. He just wants a handle. He wants a window. And so we have to be committed to, I don't care if it's justified or not, I'm not allowing anything to block intimacy with him. Because you know what? In the end, that's the only thing that can't be taken away from us.
I'm so glad you brought up the election. We know that it's next month. And
yes.
What better time to have that intimate relationship with God? Because when you look at what's happening in the election cycle and the presidential election, you're like, we're hopeless people. I mean, what do you say to that? Because we are not hopeless people as long as we have a relationship with the Lord.
Well, first of all, you know, he's calling, what is he calling us to do now? Well, one of the things is to continue to fight for righteousness, to do the right thing in our own lives, but also what can we do? Because what we do for righteousness now, Valerie, will actually carry on into the millennium when Jesus finally rules and reigns in righteousness and we rule and reign with him. So when we have that line to the future, it tells us what we can do now to build toward that. And so not voting, that's a cop-out, that's giving up. You know, God, the enemy always wants us to give up and do nothing. God's always calling us forward, like living water. It's always going like a stream, it's always moving forward. He never tells us to hide out, to give up. And so, you know, voting and being involved that way, but also not fearing. You know, fear, whether it's from the elections or not, is not from God, and it blocks our intimacy with him. And bitterness, if it's justified, and we think it's okay as Christians to just bash people, you know, candidates that we don't agree with or that don't support our views. Well, you know what we're doing when we're bashing candidates? We are aligning with how the enemy sees them. And what we need to do is have God's heart. How does God see them? Well, he desires them to be saved. So instead of, you know, what I do, I watch the news, I turn the volume off, I can still read what's happening, and I have it on during my prayer time. Because as candidates come up, and my initial reaction is anger, I think, wait, that's not God's heart toward them. And I start praying, because you know what? They're deceived. It's a warfare. I start praying, Lord, bind the enemy from deceiving them. Open their eyes. Reveal yourself to them. And I start, if we would pray for people instead of bashing them, if we would have God's heart instead of aligning, we don't realize how often we align with the enemy. But whenever we are bashing or criticizing or accusing others, whether it's justified or not, we're aligning with how the enemy sees it, because he's the accuser.
Because that's one of the things that you really talk about in Unshaken, strongholds, and not coming into agreement with what the enemy has said. You know, learning spiritual warfare, I mean, that you can get that skill set from God as you develop intimacy with him, can't you?
And it's really not that complicated. You know, we think that we have to know how to drive demons out or something. And it's not that, you know, it's like, no, spiritual warfare, it's the longer I'm a believer, I've been a believer 27, 28 years, I think it's the simpler it gets in the sense of it's pretty black and white. You know,
yes, it is.
Knowing what gives the enemy a handle, either we're releasing the enemy's power or we're releasing God's power. And so it's being aware that, hey, when I gossip, when I am angry, when I'm bashing people, when I'm putting them down or criticizing them, even if it's someone on the television, I'm aligning with the enemy. You know, when I'm praying for them, when I'm blessing them, when I'm seeing them as God sees them, I say, Lord, give me your heart for someone. You know, help me see them through your eyes. I bless them. We can always find a way to bless someone. We may not like them, but we say, I pray that they would experience healing in their heart from God. You know, we've all got these strongholds in our heart, these lies that we believe about ourselves and about others, and that's how the enemy gets a handle.
Well, Jeannie, before I let you go, I wanted you to look into your camera right there and just encourage people, you know, to develop that intimacy with God, and it starts by having a relationship with him.
Absolutely.
So would you just do that for
Yes,
me?
I just want to encourage you today that, you know, the purpose here on this earth is to experience intimacy with God, and he desires that from you. He died for you, not for you to work for him, but to have relationship, to have intimate relationship with you. And that's the one thing that you need to focus on each day. And it's the only thing that can never change and that can never be taken away from you. And in this world, when everything's changing, we need to hold on to the one thing that can't change.
I'll say amen to that. To connect with Jeannie, go to JeanneNigro.com or go to harvest-tv.com for a link to her new project, Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. Harvest continues in just a moment.